Okay. So I hope everyone can see my screen here, right? Okay. So if you remember in our previous session, we discussed a couple of fundamental concepts that are related to the mule, like what is mule event, right? How mule process a HTTP request, right? And then how your HTTP listener converts the data from HTTP request that has come from the browser into mule event, right? And then I also explained, I am on very high level, although, that what is XML and what is JSON data format, right? And I did mention that you people need to have good knowledge on the JSON and XML, right? So I hope if you, I hope you have gone through some tutorial on the internet to get some idea, right? So let's move to our next step. So as now we know the basics of Mule, we can start learning Mule components, right? So as I mentioned, right, in one of our previous session, first we will look into the components or the basic building blocks that are required to build a Mule application, right? And then we'll go for a look into the data weave expression language, right, that we use for data manipulation and translation and transformation in the Mule. And after that, we will be moving to be moving to different services and adapter that Mule provide, like how to communicate FTP, SFTP, and consume web services and stuff like that, right? And then at the end, we will look into the anypoint platform, right? Like the how to build the RAML and how to build security around an API and other things that your Mule platform provide, right? So let's start and let's look into how to develop, what all the basic building blocks or components required to build a Mule application, right? So this was our application that we were working, right? If you see here, here we had only one component called the, we have one flow, right? And inside this flow, we have a listener, HTTP listener, right? Uh, I guess I have explained that how HTTP listener works, right? And in previous session, we also configured this listener, right? And then we have a logger component, right? So logger components basically can write some information in the log, which you can configure in your flow, right? And then these things, right? So before we proceed, let me tell you, this is Mule configuration file. Okay, so if you want to write anything, any code, any application, we have to write that in a Mule configuration file. Okay, so this is one Mule configuration file which you can see right now. If you want to have another Mule configuration file, right, you can just click on the new, the right click on the folder, right, and then click on the new, and then click on the Mule configuration file, right? And then you need to write a name for your configuration file. So say suppose this is hello, right? And then you need to select your project where you want to place your configuration file, right? Just click on finish. So this is your another configuration file. So this is the Mule configuration file where you're going to write all your Mule code, right? Now Mule code can be written on two components. Okay, what is that component? That is flow and subflow. Whatever you write, right? Yeah, it will go in the flow or in the subflow. I mean, and after that we have some more components as well that we can write directly on the mule configuration file, but we will look into them later, right? Your global error configuration, global connection configuration and stuff like that, but we'll deal with them later, right? For now, if you want to write any business logic, you have to write it in the flow or in the subflow, right? So that is the point number 2. But if you look at this configuration file, right, it has 3 sections: message flow, right, global element, and configuration XML, right? So let's look at this configuration file. So this configuration file is nothing but your mule configuration file, which contains your code, right? And this tab gives you pictorial representation of your code, right? For example, let me show this thing here. So this is the pictorial representation of your logic or your application. But if you click on this one, application XML, right, you will see the same logic or same application in XML, right? So how and who are writing this XML for you? So actually what happens when you drag and drop a component, right, from this palette, right, Mule editor automatically writes XML code for you, right? For example, let me show this to you. Say suppose I drag a flow, right? So here you can see it, flow. Now come to XML. So now you have this flow component, right? Flow element here, right? And if I write a log here like this, see, now you have a log inside because I drag the log component inside the flow, so I can see this log component inside the flow. You got it? So this is your configuration file, right? And it is important for you that you get used to this code, because there will be some time when you have a really large mule configuration file or long mule configuration file. You may have to come sometime on this tab and look at your application XML to particularly do some copy paste or to modify some values, right? So whenever you write something, right, whenever you practice uh, your components or the concept, right, in coming days, right, I will recommend that you sometime come and see how your drag and drop actions are generating the XML code. It will give you some fair idea about that, how this thing works, right? You do not actually need to go or learn something explicitly, right? But if you do this couple of times, right, I mean, drag a component here and just come on this tab and see how XML is generated, right, you will get a good idea. So this is the one thing, right? So this is my flow, and here you can see the XML for that. Now next is your global element, right? So we're going to discuss in detail that what is a global element, and we have a lot to learn on this tab, right? But not now, not today. Come to here. Okay, so as I said, there are two things. There's something called the flow, right? And then there is something called the subflow, right? These are the two components, right, where you will write your business logic. Okay, where you're going to write your business logic. There is no third component where you can write your business logic, right? Inside which you can write your business logic. These are only two components, right? So you can write your business logics in Subflow, and you can also write this your business component in the flow. Now, what is the difference between the flow and the Subflow? Right, these are one of the interview question as well. Okay. Um if you look at this, if you look at my screen, right, you can see one difference, right? What is that difference? If you see flow, which is at the top, right? Let me, this is my flow, and this guy is my subflow, right? So that we don't get confused, right? So this is my flow, and this is subflow. So if you see, I mean, you can just notice one difference, right? Which is in flow, you have something called the source, right? And then you have a small dot line, and then here you can write something, right? Like in my case, I have a logger. But in case of Subflow, this portion is not available, right? In case of Subflow, this portion, this part is basically not available, right? So what is this part? This is this part. Here in this example, you can see it has as listener, right? This component is called the source, right? Now, what is the source? Or sometime you will also, I mean, if you write, we read the document, right? You will also read event source, right? So this part is called the source or event source, right? So what is this part? This part is basically responsible to start your flow, right? Or trigger your flow, right? Like in this example, right? This is HTTP listener. So when a HTTP request comes to your mule application, right, then your flow starts, your business logic starts, right? So this is called the source. In the source, you will always have a component which has capability to trigger your flow, right? You can see here HTTP request in this program, right? But here you have other components as well that you can configure. Like if a file arrives in a if a file arrives in a in a folder, right? On file change, on new file, right? That is also event source. As soon as file arrives in the folder, or if you change something in the file, in the existing file, your process should pick it up and start, right? Or you can also have something schedule, right? So suppose you want to execute a business logic, right? Every 5 minutes, every 5 seconds, every 2 days, right? You can have your schedule. So this schedule will be responsible, or this component will be responsible to trigger your flow, right? It can be your FTP listener, right? So as soon as a file comes to a FTP location, you want to pick it up and process, right? So again, you have FTP listener, you have SFTP listener, right? Many other components, right? So this part basically will have something which will have capability to kickstart your flow, right? So that is the first responsibility of this component, source component. All right. This is the first responsibility, that it will accept what it is going to do. So say suppose if this is your flow, right? So you have source here, and then you have your other components connected with each other to perform your business logic. So this will accept your request, right? Any kind of request, right? And then it will basically starts the first component, right? So first component will perform its activity, then it will say, okay, hand over the execution to the next component. Then this next component perform its execution, and then hand over the execution to the next component, and this is how it works. And remember, this execution eventually return back to the source component. Okay, all the components will be executed sequentially, right? And then your execution will return again to the source component, right? This is important, right? This is the reason, right? Because of this only you see the HTTP request, right? It accepts the request, right? But it also need to send the response back to your browser, right? So after execution of all components, this, your execution go back to the HTTP listener, and it sends the response back to your browser, right? And you will see this kind of example in other components as well, like your JMS listeners, right? So your JMS listener need to send back response to your JMS server that okay, message has been processed successfully or something like that, right? So you will see this thing there as well. So your execution eventually come back to your source, right? Point number second point is, this component will be always responsible to create the event source, and that is the reason we also call it as event source, right? So this will create the this is called the event source because it creates the event message, right? So mule event, it creates the mule event. So this is your mule event, right? So and what all things we have in the mule event? We have mule message and variables, right? What you will have in the mule message, you will have attributes and then payload, right? You will have payload and attributes, and these are your variables. I have shown this to you, right, in one of my previous sessions, right? We discuss on this in detail, right? So this is this mule event is created by the mule source event source, right? Okay, right? So this is your flow, and if you look at my screen, right, in case of the Subflow, you do not have mule source or event source, mule event source, right? You do not have that, which means, or which, if that is the case, it means what? It means a flow cannot start by itself, right? It has to be executed by somebody else, right? So like this flow can be started by itself, right? So if I have scheduler, the schedule will run every 5 minutes. So this logic will be executed every 5 minutes. I can configure my schedule that way, right? But here, this guy will not execute by itself, right? We have to, if we want to perform this logic, we have to call this flow from some other flow, right? So what happens? So the main difference is it will have event source. It does not have event source. Okay, that is the first difference between the flow and Subflow. And then you have your, okay. Now how we call this flow? I will come to that in a bit. Okay, but let's look at the second difference. Okay, second difference is, as you can see, error handling, right? We're going to discuss error handling in detail, right? But for now, just remember one point, right? I mean, and I think you do not need to even remember because you can see it, right? So this go directly in your memory. In case of the flow, right? Flow components or flows always have a default error handling. It always have a default error handler. Okay, What is default error handler? Just high level, a very quick overview, right? So say suppose you have a flow here, right? And then you have your source, right? And which if it gets any trigger, right, it will create the mu- mule event, right? And then it will execute the first, second, third, and all the components which are there, right? And if there is any error due to some reason, right, say suppose network connectivity is not there, or some you have some wrong code, right, or some expression is not evaluated properly, something like that, any error can happen, right, in a code. Then in that case your control will go to the error handler, right, which you're going to write or configure here, right? So your execution will directly jump to the error handler. But for we are not going to see what is the error handling and how it works, but for now just remember your flow have a error handle default error handling component, but your subflow does not have error handling component, right? Your subflow does not have default error handling component, right? You do not have, but you can explicitly write it, right? You will not get it by default, right? But if you want, you can do something, and you can make it to behave or work same as your flow, right? But only for the error handling, not for the source thing, right? So you can have a try catch, right? Basically try block, that where you can configure your error handling mechanism, right? Which we are going to see it later, right? So this is your flow and this is your subflow, right? So this is the two main difference that you always need to remember, right? Next, you can have any number of flows and subflows configured in your mule configuration file. There is no limit, right? Okay. So for example, let's look. Let's modify or update this code little bit. Okay. Let's write a flow. Let's first write a subflow, right? So this is your subflow. Now the next question is, I hope you are familiar with reusable code, right? So obviously, you will be creating flow or subflows if you have. I mean, if you will be creating subflows if you have some reusable code. Reusable code means, for example, right? Uh, you have a logic here, right, where you need to add two numbers, right? And I mean some operation, right, which you need to do multiple times in a business logic, right? So for example, I taken one example, log. Okay, so say suppose this is how when http request comes, right? You have http listener, and then you have flow number 1 2 3 4 5 6, right? Like that, right? And on different occasion, right, during the execution of this execution of this business logic, you have requirement to send the status to your database, okay, to some other system, say suppose, right? So what you will do, I mean, say suppose you are logging it, right? Or you're calling inserting the information in the database, for example. Let's just to make it simple. Okay, so what you will do, you will write something to 2 or 3 or 4 lines you will write, so that you insert the value in the database, then you perform some logic, then you come here and you again write to database, you come over here, then you again write to database, right? So what you will do, you will write this 4 or 5 lines code here, right? And then you will keep copy pasting in different at different location in your flow, right? Like this. Okay, so this will go here and this will go here as well, right? So this is one way to achieve the same thing, but this is a nasty way of doing it, right? Because there is a problem with this approach, and the problem is, say suppose if something change, say suppose uh, database table name change or username and password change, then what will happen? You have to change the username password here, you have to change the username password here, here, and here, everywhere. So to solve this problem, what we do is we create a separate code. We write this reusable code in a separate, somewhere separately, right? In Java, we write separate method or separate class, right? In Sterling integrator, we write different separate BP, right? Similarly, in the Mule, we write separate subflow, right? So what this subflow will contain? This subflow will contain these 3 or 4 reusable reusable lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4 lines, right? So what you're going to do now is, wherever, right, or whenever you need to use, you need to insert information in the database, right? What you will do, you simply call this flow. So say suppose flow is, this name of this subflow is flow 1. So you will call flow 1. Then here also you will call flow 1, right? Here you will also call flow 1. Here also you will call flow 1, right? And so this is what the use of the subflow. So you, instead of writing the same information of same code again and again, right, or doing the copy paste of the same information again and again, you separate out in a subflow and you call that subflow in your flow. And the advantage, what the advantage you get is, I mean, first of all, your code, your flow will be smaller, right? Instead of writing 100 lines, maybe you will write 50 lines, right? That is the first component. Second component is, the second importance is, if you have any change, right, you do not have to change, you do not have to make that change in the multiple places. You change it one place and it will be reflected everywhere, right? So that is the use of the subflow, right? So we can write reusable code in the subflow, right? So we do not have anything right now to write, right? So I will demonstrate this with something very basic, right? So say suppose I will come here, right? This is inside subflow, right? Simple, right? This is my another component, and subflow. All right. Now I'm here. Okay. So this is my reusable logic, right? I'm going to also tell you that how the variables flow from flow to subflow and how different things happens, right? But let's look into that step by step, right? Okay. So that is the point number 1. Okay. Next. So we have now some business logic written on this subflow, and that's it, right? Now what is the second step? Second step is, it will not be executed by itself, right? If I submit a HTTP request, right, my HTTP listener will be executed, then this guy will be executed, this will be executed, this will be executed, execution will flow back to listener, and the response will be sent to the browser, right? There is no way that this guy gets executed, right? Because this is completely a separate thing, right? If you want to execute this logic as well, then you have to call it, right? Now we are going to see how to call a flow, how to call a flow, right? Or a subflow, right? Flow reference. So all these things actually available in your core components. Okay, so here it is. I mean, if you do not want to type that way, right, you will see all these things here, right? So you click on the just core tab, right? You will see all the basic building blocks that Mule provides to write a program. Okay, so I just drag this one, right? Okay. Okay, this is your reference. Okay, next. Here in this drop down, right, you have to select which flow you want to call, right? If you see, uh, it will give you list of all the flows that you have write in your application, right? So why I have only two flows here, right? One is the hello world 2 flow and then hello world 2 sub underscore flow, right? Why I have so many here, right? Why I have flow and subflow? Where are these? They are in this another mule configuration file, right? So that means if you want to call a flow or subflow through the flow reference, right? So flow reference is a component that calls the flow, right, of subflow. That flow, if you want to call a flow or subflow from your flow reference, that flow reference don't need to be in the same configuration file. It can be anywhere inside your project, right? As in this example, you can see hello world and then you have hello. Two configuration file, and I can call this flow as well as this flow. Okay, so that's point number 2. So I want to call this guy, so this, right? So now when execution will reach at this place, come on this, get to this place, execution will next step will be this in the execution path, right? And then this will be executed and then the flow will return here again, right? And we can have a log here as well, so here, and after that this will be executed and then again my execution will return to the listener. Got it? So this is how it works, right? I want to point out before we move to the next thing, right? I mean, there are a couple of more things that I will explain maybe today, right? But after some time, I'm going to explain target variable and all those things, right? But we have to wait for a couple of minutes, right? Okay, let's discuss one more point, right? So I wrote my logic in the subflow, but do you think instead of using subflow, could I use flow? Yes. There, no one stops me to use. No one stops me to use flow in place of the subflow, right? So, for example, I could have a subflow here, right? I can have it like this, and I can write the same logic here, right? But the only thing in this case, this in this flow, the source, right, part will be empty, which is absolutely fine. No problem. No problem at all. Like this. Okay. And you have your error handling here as well. Right. So the question is, I mean, whatever you can do in the subflow, you can definitely do the same thing in the flow as well, right? And I can call it from my flow reference, and I can call it this as well. Okay, so let me show this here. No difference, no change. Okay, only advantage of using the flow here is you will get your error handling, default error handling, which you will not get in case of the flow. All right, so these are the two basic components that you have to learn first, right? Because you will write everything whatever you want to write in a flow. Okay, okay, I hope I have made you understand these two and the difference between these two, right? Let me know if you have any question. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this, I'm going to delete this too, I'm going to delete this too, right? We'll revisit this in a couple of minutes, right? Okay. Okay. Next, set variable. Okay. There is, oh, that's fine. There is another component, right, called the set variable, right? This is a component, right, which you can use to set variables. Where you will set the variable, you can set this variable in the mule event. Okay, what is the use of this? When you write a program, right, say suppose, and you want to start a counting, you want to count number of messages that is being processed by your application, right? Then what you will do, you need a counter, right? Like in Java, right? If you are familiar with, right, or any programming language, what you will do, you will say int x equal to 0, right? And then on every after every processing of the message, you will say x equal to x plus 1, right? So this is this is your variable, so you are setting a variable, right? The only thing is that in case of the Java, this variable gets created in your RAM, in your memory, or more precisely in case of Java, it go and gets created in the heap, right, somewhere in the RAM, right? In case of the mule, right, if you want to do the same thing, you want to create a variable, you want to modify a variable, something like that, right? What you have to do, you have to use set variable component. Okay, you have to use set variable component, right? So if you want to do the same thing, x, right, what you will do here is variable name and then variable value, say suppose 0. All right, then I want to say x equal to x, oh, okay, x plus 1. Okay, why I have done this, I'm going to explain this, right? But now we just look into that what I'm doing, right? Because right now I want to explain you only this component, right? Not the DW expression. Okay, so if you have like this, for example, in this one, if you see here, right? So if this switch is not on, right, then it means whatever you will write here, it will be treated as a string. It will go as it is in the variable. It will not be evaluated, right? But if you turn on this switch, right, it will be considered this thing, whatever you write inside this, right, it will be considered as a expression. All right, and it will be evaluated. Okay, so and in once we turn on this switch, we can write data weave expression language, right? That is the new language, and we're going to talk about a lot in detail later. Okay, so we are writing expression here. Okay, so the same thing that I'm doing here, I have done it here. Okay, now the only difference is, in case of Java, your variable is created in the heap, right? But in case of the mule, where this variable will be created, it will be created inside the mule event, right? Where inside the mule event? This is important, right? You have to remember this. This is mule event, right? This is mule message, right? And this is your, I mean, inside the mule message also, you have attributes and the payload, right? And this guy is your payload, and this is your variable, right? So this x will be created here, right? And you will say x equal to 0, right? Now to access anything from this section, right, if you want to access, you can have multiple variables here, right? X equal to 0, y equal to 5, z equal to 100 of variables you can have, n number of variables you can have, right? So if you want to access anything, right, anything from this section, right, anything from this section, if you want to access, right, you have to use a keyword called vars, right? Vars dot x, vars dot y, vars dot z. Okay, so basically vars is a keyword which means this section, this guy. Okay, so that is what I did in here in this program. So vars, right, means I want to I want to access something from my variable section, right? I'm not saying that my x will be here in the message section or in the attribute section or inside the payload. No, I want my x which is in the var section, right? Because x can be in the attribute as well, right? X can be in the payload as well. So I'm using vars so that I get directly into this section, right? And then vars.x plus 1. So whatever value you have in the vars.x, add 1 and then store back in the x, right? Okay, got it. Next, should let's execute this, right? And let's see uh, how it is working, right? And then we are going to see the payload component, right? And then we will come back to the FlowRefrence calling and the flow subflow. Okay, I'm going to start this. Okay, I will start this program, but I want to, because I want to look into step by step. I want to see the execution step by step. So I will start it in the debug mode, and I will have a pointer here at the first component, so that my execution start right here, right? And after that, I want it to execute step by step. So breakpoint and then debug. Okay, so it's starting. I don't need this. Okay, so my application has started, right? I just remove the log, right? Now, if I want to start this flow, right? I have to send a HTTP request, right? Why HTTP request? Because I have HTTP listener as event source, right? As source to trigger this flow, right? To see the configuration, like on which port I need to send the request and what URI I need to use, right? I have to go here. So here you can see here 8081 is the port on which this listener is listening, and you have student register as URL. So HTTP, I have explained that why you have to do this local, why you have to write localhost, and what is advantage, what is the advantage of using the port and stuff like that, right? So I type this URL and press enter. So as soon as I press the enter, what happens? Your browser has sent an HTTP request, right, to your Mule application, right, on the port specified in the request, which is 8081, and URI is this, right? So because of that, this listener has accepted the request, right? I could have one more listener, right, that listen on different URI, right? Like student register, instead of I could have one more URI, something like student cancellation, but that URI will invoke other logic. Okay, so we are here. So what has happened in your application in the memory so far, right? We haven't executed anything else, right? We are on the very first step, first log. In fact, if you see, execution is stopped right here. It haven't executed this step yet, right? But let's see what has happened. I mean, I have explained. Let me explain one more time, the final time maybe. Right? right? This is event message attribute payload, and this is your variables, right? And browser send this HTTP request, right? This HTTP request has lot of things, lot of information, right? So it will have headers, right? And then it will have headers, and then it will have body, right? So what your HTTP listener did, what it has done is it has extracted all the information which was in the header and placed it in the attributes. It has extracted or parsed your body section of HTTP request and place that body in the payload, right? And the variable section is still empty, but it has created the variable section. Okay. But if you see, I sent this request, right, from the browser, right? So I did not get chance to mention or have any body, right? So for this request, my payload should be empty, right? That is what my expectation will be. But I should see a lot of information in the attribute, because header is always set by your browser, right? I do not have to set the header. I do not have to provide something, right? Like your header has a lot of information, right? From which IP address the request is generated, what was the browser type, what was the browser company, and cookies, and so many other things, right? All this information browser sends to the server, and your mule source, which is the HTTP listener, has extracted that information in the attribute section. Come over here. So if we see here, right? So this is your attribute. You can see here, lot of information is here. Okay, all this information has come from browser, and this information is placed in the attribute section by the mule event source from the HTTP header. Okay, here you can see, as usual, payload is empty. The reason, var section is also empty for now, but it's okay, right? So our first component is we want to log some information in the log file. Okay, so for that we have this logger component. Okay, I go to next step. So you can see here, logger is executed and the message is printed here, right? And the message, what message printed? Start hello world. Okay, come to the next, right? In the next log, I want to print my payload. All right, but we do not have anything in the payload, so it will be an empty string, right? Here you can see the empty string. Now from here, magic starts, right? This is the new what we are going to learn. So I am setting a variable here, x, and the value is 0. If you can see it, I'm not using expression, so I'm hard coding a value, right? So let me execute this component. Executed. What do you see here? X equal to 0. Okay, x equal to 0. I'm going to discuss this part later sometime, right? So what happened? A variable is created, x, which is equal to 0. Next section. Okay, what happened? I'm saying get the value of x from where? Where section, and add one. Right. Okay. It did not add it, maybe because of it's not number, right? So it should have done it, but we can change the data type to do this, but for now let's leave it, right? So basically your variable is created in the where section. Okay, next you have log component. Come over here, your program is done, right? So this log component, I mean, I did not write anything in the message here, so it has printed everything, right? So raw information. Okay, uh, so this is your logger here. So this is about the set variable component, right? Similarly, we have one more component called the set payload, right? Let's write it here. Set payload, right? We use this component if we want to set some value in the payload, right? So payload means this component, this on this section. Okay, if we want to write something here. Okay, so if you want to set some value in the payload, if you want to maybe replace the payload, or if you want to set some value in the payload, then you can write it here. Okay, let me do this. So I will remove this for now, and I will say suppose value, right? Okay, so let's run this one more time and see how this component is working. Okay, now let me send one more request. Okay, so up to here, right? We have seen that how these things work, right? So if you see, vars do not have any variable, right? So first x is created, so because of this component, right? Now we are going to set the variable. I mean, now we are going to set the payload, right? See, so what this component has done, it has set your payload, right? And the payload is the I mean section, right, on which your most of the services work by default. like your file write service, right? Or FTP, SFTP write service, right? It basically by default write the payload, right? I mean, if you want, you can change it, but by default it write the payload. Okay, and payload is actually same thing like your primary document in the Sterling integrator. Okay, next okay, next execute this. This value is still 1. Logger, and done. Okay, so the point is you have set variable. To set the variable, you have payload to set the payload, right? Similarly, there is one more component called the remove variable. Okay, so what remove variable do? It basically removes a variable from the var section. So like in our previous example, right, we have set a variable called x in the var section. So if we want, we can remove this, right? So how will remove? We can use the remove vars variable component. Okay, so okay, let's use this. Is it running? Still running? Okay, so as I mean, in one of session I explained, right, that this mule editor, right, Anypoint Studio has something called the hot deployment, right? So if you change anything, right, in the code and you saved it, that new code automatically get deployed on the mule runtime, right? So I don't need to stop and start the application again. Okay, so let's send one more request here. Okay, so on the very first component, second component will be over here. Okay, set variable, and next you can see here x equal to 0, and then the payload, set payload, right? Next is again that you set variable, which is not doing anything right now, right? What you are doing in the next, we are using the remove variable component, right? So what it will do, it will remove your variable from the var section. Okay, see, my var section is now empty, so x is removed from the variable section. So you can use the remove component this way. Okay, now now we know how these three components work. Okay, now we are going to see how we call a flow reference and how it overall impacts the payload variable and how it executes the entire execution path. Okay, so let me set a variable here, which I'm saying in flow. Flow value. Okay, now I'm going to have a flow. Right now, as I have explained, right, I can have flow or I can have subflow, and there is few differences, right, that you know, right? So whatever I'm going to explain with the subflow, that equally applicable to the flow as well, right? If there is any difference, then I will let you know. That's a flow, right? Okay, that's a flow. I want to add one more log component here, right? Which is, now I want to print, or I want to access values or variable or the payload, right? Which was in the main flow, right? Obviously, I mean, if you are writing a subflow, right, there will be situations where you want to access the payload or the or the variables, right, which was constructed or set in the main flow. So in the main flow, I have one variable set here, right, as you can see here, and the name of that variable is main flow. And then you have, I'm going to set the payload as well with some hard coded value. Okay, and this payload can be anything. Okay, here, can now the in the subflow, first question is, can I access the variable which are in the main flow, which is created in the main flow? Yes, I can. How to access that? I'm going to just print it, right? So I will turn on my expression. Because why expression? Because I don't want to print a hard coded value now. I want mule to evaluate the expression. And what is that expression? I want it to go in the var section and uh, print the variable called main flow. This. All right. Then in the another log, okay, I want to, okay, now when you are writing a logic in the subflow, right, you are able to access your variables. But next question is, what about the payload? Can the payload which is in the main flow will be available in the subflow? So yes, the payload will be also available, right? So the point is, in the subflow, right, or subflow will have access to everything, right, that was created, configured in the main flow, right? Subflow will have access to your variables as well as payload, which was available in the main flow, right? Next, what about the variables and the payload that I create in the subflow? Okay, okay, I'm creating a value here called the subflow value. Okay, then so I already have a payload, right? I want to overwrite it, or I want to create a new payload here, right? Maybe I want to, like, I'm creating a new payload, but there may be situation you update something, right, in the payload, existing payload, right? So the question is, payload from flow. Okay, so the question is, values or the payloads that you will create in the sub. I mean, you can create, you have capability to create. That's all right. We know it, right? But the question is, the new variables or the payload that, or the updated payload that is created in the subflow, will that be available in my main flow, right? So which is my main flow? This is my main flow, right? So let's check that. But obviously I have to call that subflow, right? So as I explained, uh, to call a subflow, we have to use a component called the flow reference, right? And the flow reference is, in the flow reference, you have to select the name of the flow which you want to call. So like this. So flow reference, from with the flow reference, you're calling this. Okay. After the execution of this flow reference, your control will go here and all these components will be executed, right? After completing execution of all the components in the subflow, your execution will return to next component after the flow reference. So after the flow reference, this is the component, which is the log in our case. My question is, will that new variables or the new updated payload or the new payload that is created in the subflow, will that be available in the main flow for further use or access? So answer is yes, right? And we can check that. Let me print this payload. Okay, let me print payload here. Okay, let's see what value it prints, right? So in the main flow, we set the payload and we set the payload from the main flow, right? And then in the subflow we have set something, but here in the log I'm printing this. Okay, let's see what value we get. Flow. Okay, so let's okay, so it is, as I'm updating, changing, Anypoint platform is also updating or deploying the new code to the mule runtime. So I can directly send a request to this application. Okay, so we are on the very first component here. Okay, we don't see anything, and you can see different variables as expected. Var is empty, payload is empty, and attribute have a lot of values as usual. Okay, so logger printed the message whatever we want. Come to the next. Okay, the first one, it has created a variable called the main flow, right, in the var section, right? So because of this component. Next, set the payload. So you can see here payload is set to payload from the main flow, right? And this, I mean, just to explain you this concept, right? I have this string payload from the main flow, right? But in the real example, actually, it will be like your XML or your JSON that you have received from one of your mule source component. All right, and we are going to discuss that as well. Okay, you come to your flow reference, right? So the first log inside the subflow, right? This is what we have right in this flow, right? Now in the second logger, if you see, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to access the variable, right? So the question is, can I access this variable? So you are going to see, right? But even that, if you see here, right, you have access to all the variables. See, VARS has this variable, right? Payload is still the same, what was in the main flow, right? So this window itself proves that in the subflow you have access to everything, and that was available in the main flow, including your attribute, as you can see here. All right. So this main flow value, right? And then in the next logger, I want to print the payload, right? So payload from the main flow, as you can see here. Got it? Right? And then you have your next component is set variable. So here I'm setting a variable in the subflow, and the name of my variable is subflow value. Right. So in the var section, you can see now you have two variables, main flow and the subflow value. All right. And then I set the payload, right? So I set the payload here, right? And so you can have only one payload, right? In entire section, right? In entire flow, payload has to be have only one, right? So if you use the two set payload, right, your second payload will overwrite whatever value was set by the first component, set payload component, right? So same thing. So, and remember, this is also something you need to remember, the payload can be only one, right? In your variable you can have multiple values, right? And you can also copy the entire payload in one of the variable in your var section. So that is a possibility, but payload will be only one, payload section will only one. So here we override the payload with the new value. So payload from the subflow, right? So you can see here, this is overridden, right? You come over here, you will see my control has or execution has written from the subflow to the main flow, right? So it hasn't executed this component yet, but you can see what has changed. So you can see here, main flow has get everything whatever was set in the, or whatever was updated in the subflow, right? Subflow has access to the main flow variable, right? So it could also update this value, right? It could change to something else, right? And then you have this, right? So main flow also have access to the variable that is created in the subflow, and the payload is from the subflow, right? So the payload that was set by the main flow, that has been overridden, okay, that's no longer exist. So the main flow will have access to the payload that is set by the subflow, right? So this is how it works, right? You can see here, and now end of execution. So this is how we call the flow and subflow, right? And now remember, this is you have to always remember, so the whatever we just not I just not explained, right, this equally applicable to the flow and the subflow, right? So instead of the flow, if I had subflow, right, the concept that we learned, that will remain same, okay? So this is how we call the subflow. Next, now because we are on this component, right, so I'm thinking to finish it, okay? So to finish this subflow component, right, you have to learn one more thing, which is these two options, target and target value, okay? What you just now saw is your main flow has a payload, right? Your main flow has a payload which is overridden by the payload from the subflow, right? So after execution of your Subflow, your flow, I mean your the payload which was set by the main flow was gone. It was overridden. But there may be some situation or some scenario, all right, where you do not want this. You want to preserve your payload, right? Because you want to work with the same payload or same data in your flow after the execution of subflow. Then how are you going to do this, right? So obviously the first option is you save this payload to some other variable, right? And then after the execution, you retrieve payload from that from that variable. So what I mean is, I mean, you can always do something like this, right? So set variable, right? Right. So say suppose it's a backup, and then here you can always say payload, right? So you are basically saving the value of the payload, right? The entire payload, entire file, or your JSON data, right, in the backup payload. And so that is the one way, right? So after the flow reference, right, you set the payload again, right? You do something like this, set payload, right? And then you say vas dot backup payload, right? So it will set the payload from your variable back to the payload again. So you basically now you will have opportunity to work with the same payload that was available in the main flow before calling the subflow. So that is the one way, right? But other way is in your flow reference, right? And this these two fields will be in other components as well. That it will be with all the components that basically produce data. Okay, so like this subflow, right? So subflow produce data, some data, right? It change the execution path and then it produce some data. So here, if you want, you can save the payload written by the your subflow in a different variable, right? So let's say suppose I say from payload from subflow, right? So this time what will happen? I will get my payload, right, in the this variable payload from subflow. Okay, let's execute this. Is it deployed? Yes, I think. So same thing, right? If you see here, payload from subflow. Okay, so this is the payload from subflow. So why you have this variable payload from subflow? Because you have set up you configure the target variable, and you are saying my payload should be stored in a variable called the payload from subflow, right? So it created a variable payload from Subflow, and it stores the value of the payload, right? Which value? Payload value, which is set by your Subflow in this variable, right? In this payload from Subflow variable. All right. And so that means our payload remains same, right? So before the calling the Subflow, what was the payload? After the execution of the Subflow, we still have the same payload. That is what it does. All right. So, and this component is this concept is basically called the enrichment, right? So in your interview, maybe you will get this question, that what is the enrichment in the MuleSoft. So you have to explain this, right? So all the component that produce data, they always have a target variable and value in the configuration. So we can set the target, right, to save the previous values or previous state, right? And if you remember one more thing, right, if you see one more thing, and or if you notice one more thing, this time we did not get the variable that is created in the that is created in the Subflow. Okay, if you remember, in the Subflow we created a variable, right? And what was the name of that variable? Name of the variable was Subflow value, right? And the value was from Subflow, right? This variable was available to the main flow when we did not set the target, and or we did not do the enrichment. But once we set up the target, once we do the enrichment, right, we do not get the other values or other variables that are created in the main flow. We get only value that we have set up in the target, right? So simply payload is saved in the this variable, and all other variables that are created in the subflow are discarded, right? This is something you have to remember, and you can see it here as well. Okay, so this is about the flow and subflow and this target or the message enrichment. Okay. Okay, now what next we are going to see, we can look into one more thing. Okay, now let's look at the if else, right? So like any programming language, right, programming language, you always in the basic building blocks, that programming language provide you if else or conditional operator. Like in Java you have if else, right? So in the Mule also we have conditional operator, and we call it where it is, choice. Okay, we call it choice. Okay, so choice operator or choice component basically works as if else. Okay, right? Choice, if you want to use choice, well, just drag choice from the palette in your work area inside your flow or Subflow, and then you can use it, right? So this is your choice. Inside when, okay, you can write an expression. All right, you can write the expression. If that expression is evaluated true, right, then only uh, the component which is inside that block will be executed. Okay, so for example, what I'm trying to say is this. Let's say suppose we are writing an application, right, where we will get uh, a value in the HTTP request called gender, right? And we have a requirement, right, where we need to gender will be the male or female, right, or maybe none. I mean, like somebody do not want to disclose their gender, right, because of the privacy, right? So then we need to have separate uh, logic, right? If user do not want to is gender. Okay, so in that case we can use the conditional operator if else or the choice in case of the mule, right? And we can write different branches or different routes, right, based on the result of evaluation of expression, right? Your specific router will be executed. So for example, in this case, so if I I mean I think I have already explained, right, like how to access parameter values, query parameter values in the in mule application, right? So how to access this? You have to do attributes dot query param dot gender, right, equal to male. If it's a male, then perform one set of logic, right? So say suppose, I mean, just to keep this simple, uh, I just want, I'm printing something, right? And what I will print is, I beside the log I also want to print, beside the message I also want to print that value, right? This is male user, like this. Okay, okay, that's right, that's fine, right? My second logic is, which is separate, that is for the female, right? So what I will do, right, now I want to create one more branch, right? If it's, I want to do something like that. If it's a male, then do this. If it's a female, then do this. Copy this. Right, but if so, logs will be the same thing. Let me print this. All right. And you will see this, right, unable to call this. You just don't need to worry about it, right? There's some problem with this editor, right? So it show that there is error, but actually there is no error, right? You will see it now. Okay. And so if it's a mail, then have this set of logic which I'm going to write here in this route or block, and you can have any number of components added in this block, right? Just like now I just added one log, but you can write any component, whatever you like, right? And any number of components you can configure. Similarly for this as well. Okay. And now this is your default, right? So default is executed, right? It's like if else, and at the end else, right? So default is executed if none of the your condition matched in the for each, in the choice operator, okay, or in the choice component. So when your execution will start, right, at some point it will come on this choice. It will first execute the first route. So this is called the one route. Okay, it will execute the first route. If it's execute, I mean it will be evaluated, I mean it will evaluate the when condition inside that route, right? If this condition is true, then component inside this route will be executed. But if this expression is evaluated to false, right, your component execution will go to the next route, and the condition in that route will be checked. If that matches, right, then component inside that route will be executed. But right, and remember one thing: if the first expression in the first route is evaluated to true, right, then the second expression will not be evaluated. Okay, if the expression in the first route is evaluated to true, the second expression, second when will not be, or second expression in the second route will not be evaluated, even if it's true. All right, even if it's true, it will not be evaluated, right? So the first one will be first route will be executed, and then your execution will go to the next component which is after the choice, right? Then you have a default, right? So default is like when none of expression in your choice operator is evaluated to true, then the default route will be executed, which is here. So if you want, you can configure whatever you want, you can configure it here, right? So value of specified. Okay, this is my default logic. All right, so this is about your if else. This is how you can use condition in a mule flow, right? We're going to try it now, right? But the few things that you need to remember is if you want to have if else or conditional operation, then you need to drag the choice from the core components, right? And then you will get one branch by default, and then you click on it, write your condition that or the expression that need to be evaluated, and if that expression is true, then that branch will be executed. You can add n number of routes or branches in a choice. And how you will do is, how you will add new branches, just take any component, right, and get to here, right, in somewhere in the middle, right, you will see a line. Okay, and then wherever you want to add the new branch, just drag it there. For example, this one, right? And then you will have when again, and this is where you're going to write your expression, right? To write the expression, obviously you have to switch on your expression mode, right? And then you can write expression, right? So you can have your expression based on the sub value in the where section. You can have your expression based on the some value in the payload, right? And like in our case, we want to check a value which is set in the attributes. Okay, let's run this. Okay, is it deployed? It's running or not? Is deployed or not? Okay, now we are at the choice, as you can see here. All right. Okay, let's look at the attributes, right? Here you can see query params, right? Inside the query param, you can see it has one attribute which is gender, right? And the value is male, right? So it's basically a map, like Java, your Java map. So map has key value pair thing, right? So key is the gender and the value is the value of that gender, in our case, which is male, right? Let's go here. So as you can see, my first branch is executed, right? So control has entered in the first route or in the first branch, and the reason behind that is because the value of gender is male in this particular request, right? So this branch is executed. um, so it will go like that, right? So similarly, if I enter different value, say suppose female, right? Come here, right? Let's go to the if or your choice, right? This time it came on the default, and why it is like that? Oh no, it is on here only. Okay, so where it is, gender is female, right? So it will it is in this branch. So it will evaluate this branch, right? Whatever you components you have here, it will execute it, and it will then move to the next component, right? Like this. Similarly, if you have something which is not matching, or this if this value is not percent, right, then you will see it, your default path will be executed, right? If you look at here, so this time it has come on the default, right? So this is how your uh, choice component works, right? So far we looked at the simple components, right? Now in the, I mean, I think for today this is good enough, right? And now let me stop recording.